He saw a girl sitting in the shadows while the table overflowed with food, and no one cared why. In a warm kitchen where the table groaned with roast and bourbon, Elias McGraw noticed something cold. A thin girl, knees tucked in, sat in the shadows with empty hands. No one fed her, no one cared. He asked, quiet but clear, "Why ain't she eatin'?" That single question cracked open 2 lives, and neither would ever be the same again. Dust Hollow wasn't much more than a splinter of a town holding on to the edge of winter. The sky was the color of old bone, and wind dragged through the alleyways like something looking for a name. Elias McGraw pulled his duster tight as he stepped down from his buckboard. The cold bit clean through, but he didn't flinch. It had been biting for years. The Crowder place sat near the edge of town, a tall, sloped-roofed house, painted years ago in a shade that had long since surrendered to dust. Smoke curled from the chimney, nay in thin, resigned strands. Elias had been invited, though he couldn't say why. Jed Crowder wasn't the inviting type. They'd crossed paths at a feed auction 2 days prior, when Jed had slapped him on the back and said, "You eatin' proper these days, old-timer. Come by for supper." No warmth in it, just that brand of politeness men used when they didn't want trouble. He hadn't expected much, but he hadn't expected the girl. She was small, maybe 8, sat folded on a low stool by the stove, her elbows tucked in, hands flat on her lap like she'd been taught not to reach for things. The table was dressed like Sunday: ham, beans, cornbread, fried potatoes slick with bacon grease. But she wasn't at it, just watched. Elias pulled out a chair, nodded thanks to Martha Crowder, and took his coffee with a splash of something sharp. It burned going down, which was just as well. The cold inside him needed more than warmth. His eyes landed on the girl again. No plate, no cup, not even a scrap of bread. She stared back, not boldly, not scared either, just watching. He cleared his throat. "Ain't she eatin'?" Jed didn't look up. She already had hers. Elias turned to the girl. She didn't nod, didn't blink, just sat there, like part of the furniture that didn't know it didn't belong. "Your girl?" Elias asked. Martha stepped in then, smile like something pinned too tight. "Clara May's our niece, came to stay a while. Poor things folks passed on in the flood last year out in Gunnison." Elias studied Clara again. He'd seen that look before, back when Ruth Ann was alive and they'd buried their youngest. Kids stopped talking sometimes when sorrow took root too early. They learned quiet as armor. "Well," Elias said, pushing his plate forward, "I can't finish all this. Be ashamed to waste it." He stood, took the plate to the stove, knelt beside the girl. "You like potatoes?" he asked, not too soft, not too hard. Clara didn't. "Move!" Martha's voice cracked sharp. "She don't need spoilin', Mr. McGraw." "I ain't spoilin', I'm offerin'." He set the plate down anyway. Still no move from Clara, but her eyes flicked down to the plate, then back to his face. Jed cleared his throat. "Don't want her gettin' used to handouts. She earns her keep." Elias didn't answer. He stood slow, let the silence hang there. Something about it itched under the skin, like a shirt not washed right. He'd been in rooms like this, rooms where silence told stories no one dared speak. That night they gave him a blanket and pointed to the barn. "House is full," Jed said. Elias didn't argue. He preferred the company of horses to men like Jed anyway. As he lay on the hay under the dark rafters, the wind howled low outside, and he heard the houseboards creak. Somewhere inside, a girl sat in the dark, empty-stomached, trained to be quiet. He pulled his coat over his chest and let the cold in. It was familiar at least. The barn smelled of old leather and dry hay, and the quiet had a way of settling in Elias's bones like cold rain. He hadn't slept long when a sound woke him. software hesitant, not wind, not coyote. He sat up slow, hand brushing the butt of the Colt under his coat. Then he heard it again. Sniffles. The kind a child makes when she's trying not to cry. He stood, pulling on his boots without tying them, and stepped out into the cold. The sky was starless, the kind of black that swallowed everything. A dim light flickered from the house-kitchen window. Elias walked quiet. He wasn't a man to intrude where he wasn't wanted, but this wasn't intrusion. This was instinct. Inside the kitchen was a shadow of warmth. A small fire still smoldered in the hearth. And there, huddled by the stove, was Clara May. She wasn't crying outright, just sitting on the floor in her thin cotton nightdress, arms around her knees. A broken cup lay near her feet, a pool of water spreading slowly across the boards. He didn't speak at first, just watched her from the doorway. The girl wasn't startled, didn't jump, or look guilty. She just stared down at the mess like it had confirmed something she already believed. Elias stepped in. His boots thudded on the wood, heavy and slow. "I ain't mad," he said. She blinked but said nothing. "That cup means something." She nodded, barely. "Martha's?" he guessed. Clara's voice was a whisper. She said it was her mama's, told me not to touch it. She hugged her knees tighter. "I was just trying to get water." Elias crouched. "You thirsty now?" She shook her head, eyes glassy. "Cold." Another small shake. He reached for a chair, sat down, elbows on his knees. "You ever seen a horse up close, Clara?" She looked up then, for the first time. Her eyes were like creek water in winter, clear, cold, and deep enough to drown in. I seen 'em passin' the fence." "Well," he said, voice low, like offering a secret. "I got one out there. Old Red's gentle. Won't bite, kick, or snort. Just eats and farts like the rest of us." That almost pulled something from her lips. Not quite a smile, but a tug. "You want to see him come morning?" he asked. "I can't." "Why's that?" "They'll get mad." Elias didn't answer. He just leaned back in the chair and looked at the dying fire. After a while, he stood up slow, walked to the stove, grabbed a dish towel, and cleaned up the water like it wasn't a crime. Then he picked up the broken cup. "You know," he said, holding the two largest pieces together, "some things break and no one even notices. Some things break and everybody yells, but some things break and they just stay broken." Clara's fingers twitched. He knelt again, looked her straight in the eye. "But not you, Clara May, you're not a thing." She didn't speak, but her jaw clenched. That small movement said more than words. He stood, nodded toward the barn. "I'll leave the stall gate open in case you change your mind." As he turned to leave, she said so quietly it might have been the wind, "Can he run?" He paused. "He used to. Now he mostly walks. But he listens good." Clara lowered her head, hair falling like curtains around her face. Elias stepped out into the night, back into the cold. He didn't sleep the rest of that dark stretch of hours. Something about the way that girl sat beside broken glass made his chest ache in a way it hadn't in years, like a storm coming low and slow across the plains. The sun rose slow and brittle over Dust Hollow, its light filtering through the frost-covered glass like it wasn't sure it belonged. Elias stood out front, loading up his wagon. The mule gave him a hard look, then went back to chewing dry oats. He'd be gone before breakfast. Men like Jed Crowder didn't like lingering company. From the porch, Clara watched. She was barefoot, toes curled tight on the cold boards. Her hair was messy, one sleeve longer than the other. She didn't wave. She didn't call out. But when Elias turned to hook the reins, he caught her stepping forward. Just one small step off the porch. Not even enough to reach the yard, but enough. He tipped his hat. "Till next time, little miss." She didn't smile. just blinked slowly like she was memorizing him, like people had left before, many of them, and she was trying to see if this time might be different. The road out of Dust Hollow wound through frostbitten cottonwoods and prairie burned gold by drought. It should have felt like relief to be out of that house, away from stiff smiles and tight-stitched lies. But Elias couldn't shake it, that small step, that silent ask. The wagon wheels creaked. Somewhere behind, the wind caught a shutter and slammed it closed. Sounded like a shot. He drove past the old graveyard on the ridge, the one where Ruth Ann lay beneath a crooked pine. He didn't stop. Couldn't. He'd told her everything he needed to say years ago, and none of it had changed. At the ranch, the fields waited quiet. The barn still leaned like an old man trying to listen. The chickens clucked, the windmill squeaked, and not a damn thing felt different. But it was. Because in the quiet, Elias could still feel her eyes. He made coffee stronger than usual. Fried up some eggs? Couldn't eat 'em. Let the fire burn too low, let it snap back too hard. By nightfall, the unease had set in like fever. He sat on the porch, pipe in hand, not lit, just there, watching the dark roll in. Ruth Ann's rocking chair moved in the wind beside him, empty, now 10 years. "You'd tell me to leave it alone," he muttered. "Say I got no business bringing strangers into my storm." He didn't expect an answer, but silence had its own kind of pressure. He thought of his boys, both gone before they could grow calluses. Thought of the names never carved into wood because they hadn't made it long enough for a gravestone. Thought of how Ruth Ann had held on until she couldn't, and how the house had never felt like a home since. And then he thought of Clara May standing there barefoot, not begging, not smiling, just hoping for something she didn't dare name. Next morning, Elias packed a satchel. By noon, he was riding again, dust trailing behind like smoke off a long-cooled fire. The mule knew the road now, knew the ache in his bones meant they weren't done yet. Dust Hollow hadn't changed in 2 days, still smelled like sour mash and mule sweat, but when he pulled up to the Crowder place, something was different in the air. Martha opened the door with that same tight-lipped smile. "Back so soon?" "I ain't here to visit," Elias said. Jed stepped into view. "What the hell you want, McGraw?" "I came to speak on the girl." "You done seen her. Now go on." Elias didn't move. "I'm offering to take her in, train her with the horses. She'd get meals, warm bed, work to earn her keep." Jed barked a laugh. "You think you're saving her? You think she's some stray pup you can teach to sit?" "No," Elias said softly. "I think she's a child, and I think y'all forgot what that means." The air thickened, then came the voice from inside, light, unsure. "Mr. McGraw?" "Clara." She stepped into view, hair brushed now, eyes wide, clutching something tight. A handkerchief, maybe. Elias bent down, knees cracking, until they were eye to eye. "The horses are waiting. You still want to meet 'em?" The wind held its breath, and then, slowly, Clara nodded. Behind her, Jed growled, "You ain't taking her, not without papers." But Elias stood tall. "She ain't property, and I got enough law in my blood to know that. Sheriff'll see to the rest." He held out his hand. Clara hesitated, looked back once, then forward, and stepped into the cold toward him. The first few minutes riding out from the Crowder place were so quiet Elias could hear Clara's breath, shallow, like she was afraid even the wind might scold her. She sat beside him on the wagon bench, clutching the hem of her coat like it was the only thing keeping her from floating off. Elias didn't talk much. He'd learned long ago that silence gave room for the soul to settle, and some souls had been rattled too hard, too young. The mule kept pace steady. The road stretched long and pale, dusted with snow that hadn't yet decided to melt. Behind them, the Crowder house shrank into the gray haze, like a bad dream fading after dawn. By the time they reached the edge of Coyote Ridge, Clara's shoulders had dropped just a little, not relaxed, but not braced for impact anymore. Elias pointed toward the far pasture. "That barn's older'n me. Don't lean on it too hard, might fall right over." Clara didn't smile, but her lips parted, like she'd thought about it. Her fingers brushed the brim of her cap, pulled down low against the wind. As they crossed the last ridge, the ranch came into full view. Nothing grand, just weathered wood and stone, with fences that zigzagged like old scars across the land. 2 horses grazed near the fence line, heads lifting slow at the sound of the wagon. Clara sat up straighter, her eyes lit, not wide and sparkling like a child at a fair, but deeper, quiet interest, like she was letting herself feel something new and didn't want to spook it. Elias watched her watch them. "That's Red," he said, pointing. "Big one with the white star. Other one's Jenny. She's older. Don't do much but complain." He parked the wagon and climbed down. When Clara hesitated, he offered his hand. Not like a command, just a choice. She stared at it for a second, then took it. Her boots hit the dirt. She looked around the yard like someone dropped into a painting they didn't believe was real. No voices, no slammed doors, just wind in the grass and chickens scratching, like they didn't have a care in the world. Inside, the house smelled of coffee and dry pine. Elias motioned toward the stove. "You hungry?" Clara shrugged. "Good. That means yes." He ladled stew into a bowl, thick with beans and smoked pork, placed it on the table, then stepped back. She sat slow, glancing once to make sure no one was about to tell her she didn't belong. She ate like someone used to rationing, measured, careful, eyes checking corners. Elias sat across from her but didn't eat, just sipped coffee and watched the fire pop in the hearth. Afterward, Clara wandered the living room, quiet as a breeze. Her hand brushed over the mantel, over the picture of Ruth Ann in a faded blue dress, holding a baby no longer living. Then her eyes found something on the bookshelf, a small, raggedy fabric rabbit patched and restitched a dozen times. "She made that?" Clara asked. Elias nodded. "For our girl. Didn't get the chance to hold it much." Clara picked it up like it might fall apart in her hands. "She'd want you to have it," he said. Clara didn't answer, but she carried it to the room he showed her, Ruth Ann's old sewing room turned spare bed, and placed it on the windowsill, like it was standing watch. Later, as Elias fixed a hinge on the barn door, he noticed Clara crouched outside the chicken coop, watching, studying. One hen waddled toward her, pecked curiously at her boot. Clara let out the softest sound, half laugh, half gasp. It wasn't a full smile, but it was the closest thing to daylight he'd seen on her face. That night, after she'd gone to bed, Elias sat alone on the porch with a tin cup of coffee gone cold. The wind carried the sounds of settling wood and distant coyotes. But something else too, lighter, quieter. Possibility. He leaned back in Ruth Ann's old rocker, let it creak beneath his weight. Inside, a girl was asleep in a room where grief used to live. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the only soul still walking through ashes. The rooster crowed late that morning as if unsure whether it was worth waking the world. Elias was already up feeding the mule and tossing hay into the barn. When he came back in, he expected to find Clara still wrapped up under quilts, the way kids should be after a hard ride and a hard life. But there she was, sitting on the floor near the stove, legs crossed, rabbit in her lap, watching the flames like they had secrets. "You hungry?" he asked. She didn't answer, just nodded. Elias cracked eggs into the skillet, fried bacon till it snapped, poured 2 mugs of strong coffee, added sugar and a splash of milk into hers, set the plate in front of her like it was an offering. She waited. He nodded toward it. "Ain't no one here gonna take it from you." That's when she picked up the fork, slow and deliberate. First bite, then another, and another. Elias ate across from her, quiet, the kind of quiet that lets things settle without pushing too fast. After breakfast, she followed him outside without a word. The frost had begun to lift, leaving the earth soft and dimpled underfoot. Clara stepped carefully, boots still too big, coat buttoned wrong, sleeves past her fingers. At the stable, Elias opened the main door and let her walk into the darkened barn with him. Red snorted from his stall. Jenny tossed her head. Clara's eyes lit in a way he hadn't seen before. Not bright like joy, but alive. Curious, almost sacred. She ever been near a horse before? Elias wondered aloud. She reached for the rail, careful, then paused. They bite, she asked. Only if you lie to 'em, he said. Like folks. She nodded, serious, and took a step closer. Red leaned forward, nose twitching. Clara raised her hand and let him sniff. The horse snorted warm breath into her palm, and then she smiled. Not big, not long, but enough. That afternoon, Elias handed her a brush, showed her how to curry Red's coat in circles, how to check his hooves for stones. She watched everything. Movements precise, eyes narrowed with a kind of focus grown in girls who've been denied a place to belong. At lunch, she washed her hands without being told, set the table with mismatched plates, laid the napkin beside the spoon. When she ate, she chewed slow. When she spoke, it was short. "Why don't you got no kids?" she asked. Elias didn't look up. "I did." She blinked once, then stared at the rabbit on the windowsill, said nothing more. By late afternoon, she was walking the fence line behind him, helping repair a busted post, held the hammer with two hands, tongue stuck out between her teeth. Elias watched from the side, thought about how many things had broken on this land. Fences, hearts, promises. But maybe some things could be mended. That night, he found her sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a quilt. Rabbit tucked under one arm. She stared at the stars like they might answer something no one else could. "You cold?" he asked. She shook her head. "Can't sleep?" She nodded. He sat down beside her, knees cracking, the porch groaning beneath them both. They sat a long time like that. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything neither of them had learned how to say yet. Finally, Clara spoke. "Red likes me." "Reckon he does." He didn't bite. "Nope." She looked at him, squinting like the moonlight was too much. "You didn't either." Elias didn't smile, but something deep in him shifted, slow as thawing earth. "Well," he said, "sometimes not biting's the best you can do." She laid her head against his arm, not hard, just enough to lean, enough to mean it. Inside, the fire hissed low, and for the first time since Ruth Ann's picture had been set on that mantel, the house didn't feel like a shrine. It felt like something waking up again. The snow returned 2 days later, soft and slow like ash falling from a sky that couldn't decide what it mourned. Elias stood on the porch, staring into the gray distance, cup of coffee cradled in both hands. Clara sat by the window inside, tracing shapes in the fogged-up glass with one finger. Her rabbit sat beside her like a sentry. It had been a quiet stretch, 3 meals a day, chores done without fuss, Clara learning to sweep the stable and water the chickens like it was a kind of prayer. The girl didn't talk much, but she listened hard. Sometimes Elias caught her mouthing the names of horses under her breath, as if claiming them in secret. That morning, as he refilled the lamp oil, hooves cracked on the frozen road. Sheriff Caldwell. Elias opened the door before the man knocked. The lawman stepped in, brushed snow from his shoulders. His coat still carried the smell of trail dust and stale coffee. "Just checking in," the sheriff said, voice low. "Jed Crowder's stirring trouble." Elias poured him coffee. Clara stayed silent in the corner, watching like a stray dog, deciding if a hand meant kindness or something else. "What kind of trouble?" Elias asked. "Said you lured the girl away. Talked to Foyers. Claimed she was sick, that you took her without say-so." Martha tried to smooth it over, but folks like Jed don't give up when they think they've lost face. Elias sipped his coffee. He let her rot in the back of the house, fed her scraps. "I know," Caldwell said, "but courts don't always listen to what's true, just what's loud." Clara didn't flinch, but she blinked once, slow, like she'd already known. Later that afternoon, Elias walked her down into the cellar, root vegetables hanging from ropes, mason jars stacked in rows. He knelt beside a section of the wall and pulled back 2 loose boards. Behind them, a crawl space lined with blankets, a lantern, a small tin of crackers. "Sometimes," Elias said, "bad folks don't wait for permission." Clara crouched beside him, eyes wide. "If someone comes and I ain't nearby, you hide in here. Don't come out till I knock 4 times. You hear me?" She nodded. Elias handed her a small satchel. "What's in there's for you, in case you ever need to go." Clara peeked inside. A jar of jam, a clean scarf, a pair of socks, a tiny knife dull enough not to scare but sharp enough for rope. She didn't cry, but her fingers tightened around the bag like she might need it tonight. That evening, Clara packed the satchel herself, added her own things: a book of birds with torn pages, the cloth rabbit, a tin cup with 1 dent in it. She asked Elias, voice barely above breath, "How long do I stay if you don't knock?" "As long as it takes." Clara didn't sleep much that night. She lay in bed with the rabbit, one eye on the crack of the door, the other on the stars out the window. The next day, Elias watched her walking fence line, alone, saw the way she moved, not scared but aware, like someone waiting for something not quite named. That evening, Clara made cornbread without being asked. She set the table, poured milk, folded the napkin just so. When they sat to eat, she spoke. Not much, just this: "Do you think they'll come?" Elias looked up from his plate, met her eyes. "I know they will. Will you send me away?" "No, girl, I already chose." She looked down, fingers fidgeting in her lap. Then quietly she said, "So did I." After supper, Clara practiced hiding again, this time faster, smoother. She learned to keep quiet under the floorboards, learned how to place the rabbit over the gap so no light escaped. Elias watched her. He didn't show it, but his chest ached in a way he hadn't felt since burying Ruth Ann. Not grief, not exactly, but the weight of being needed again and knowing it came with risk. Outside, the wind picked up. The barn door creaked. Snow fell harder, and under it all, beneath the warmth of stew and firelight, was a silence that didn't feel safe. It felt like waiting. They heard the hooves before they saw the dust. Just past noon, the sun low and pale, behind drifting cloud, a single rider pushed up the ridge trail toward Elias's fence line. Clara stood in the barn doorway, bucket in hand, frozen. Elias came from the side of the house, rifle slung loose over one shoulder. He didn't raise it, didn't need to. Jed Crowder didn't bother tying his horse. He let it wander, like he was here for something bigger than manners. He stepped down, all spit and scowl, and pulled a folded sheet from his coat. "You gone and forgot the law, McGraw?" Elias didn't answer. Jed shoved the paper toward him. "Court order. You took what ain't yours. Now the law says bring her back." Clara stood just behind the doorframe, close enough to hear every word. Elias could feel her there, a quiet weight in the air. "You're gonna let her read it herself?" Elias asked, voice flat. Jed barked a laugh. "She don't need to read nothing. She's just a scared little girl." "She's scared, all right, but she ain't yours to scare anymore." Jed's grin curdled. "You think a court's gonna side with an old widower who keeps kids in a horse barn?" Elias took the paper, folded it in half without reading, and dropped it into the rain barrel. Jed flinched. "You son of a—" Before he could finish, Elias stepped forward, calm, but something hard behind the eyes. "You come back here with another man, or worse, I'll bury you where you stand. You understand me?" Jed held his ground just long enough to prove he wouldn't be bullied, then spit in the dirt and backed off. "Enjoy her while you can," he muttered. "She ain't yours. She never will be." When the dust settled and Jed rode off, Elias turned and saw Clara standing there, her knuckles white around the bucket. He didn't speak, neither did she, but that night, after supper, Elias pulled down a small box from the high shelf above the hearth. Inside was a dress, light blue, never worn, fine stitching, lace collar. Ruth Ann had sewn it the year she died, said she wanted a daughter to wear it one day. That day never came, until now. He handed it to Clara, didn't say anything, just let her unfold it on the table. Her fingers trembled at first, then steadied. She looked at him, eyes glassy but not spilling. "For me?" she asked. He nodded. She clutched it to her chest like it might vanish. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. Elias shook his head. "Don't need no 'sir' between us." She hesitated, then said it. "Thank you, Pa." The word hung in the air like smoke from the fire, soft, warm, and full of everything they hadn't yet said. Later that night she didn't sleep right away, sat by the fire, holding the dress in her lap. Elias sat across the room, carving a piece of wood into something that might become a bird if he got the shape right. The wind shifted. A quiet settled over the house, not peaceful, but heavy, like something waiting to be tested. Clara finally spoke. "He's gonna come back, isn't he?" Elias looked at her, nodded once. She leaned back into the chair, pulled the quilt over her knees. Then, softly, like she was promising herself more than him, she said, "Then I'll stay ready." Elias put the carving down, watched the way her jaw set, not hard but determined, like a seed finally choosing to grow in stubborn ground. Outside, the barn door banged once in the wind. Inside, they didn't flinch. Not anymore. The courthouse at Lone Butte sat square and weathered, its wood gray with years and the west wind. No flag flew that morning, only the call of crows on the roof, like a warning sent in feather and breath. Elias tied the horse with steady hands. Clara sat behind him on the saddle, stiff in the blue dress Ruth Ann had made. She'd asked to braid her own hair that morning, said she wanted to look like someone who knew things. Inside, the room was no bigger than the livery stable. A judge with a crooked back, Sheriff Caldwell near the wall, arms folded, 2 folks from town and 1 old man dozing in the jury box. Jed Crowder sat upright like a man born to accuse. His wife Martha sat behind him, eyes low. She hadn't spoken to Clara once, not when they passed in the hall, not even now. Elias stood beside Clara. He didn't touch her shoulder, didn't whisper courage. She wasn't the kind to need it spoken. The judge cleared his throat. "We're here to decide legal guardianship of one Clara May. Statements will be heard. I expect respect from all." Jed spoke first, loud, too loud. "She's ours by paper and by God," he spat. "Took her in when no one else would. This man," he pointed at Elias like the word man hurt to say, "he snuck her out like a horse thief." The judge raised a brow. Was there force? Jed faltered. She was confused, doesn't know what's best. Dr. Thomas, the town's doctor, testified next. Calm voice. Girl was underfed, covered in old bruises, and hadn't grown a full inch in the past year. Sheriff Caldwell added, "We've had whispers about that house for a while now. No one ever saw Clara play or laugh." Jed's face reddened. Martha looked down at her gloves, twisting them in her lap. Then the judge turned toward Clara. "You can speak if you want, child." Clara stood. No one helped her up. No one had to. She looked at the judge, then at Jed, then down at her shoes for just a second. "When I lived there," she began, voice slow but clear, "I ate last. Sometimes not at all. I didn't go to school. I wasn't allowed outside unless it was to carry water or sweep. The room was quiet. Even the crows stopped outside. "They didn't hit me all the time," she said, "just enough so I'd stay small." The judge looked over his glasses. "And Mr. McGraw?" Clara turned to Elias, who hadn't moved. "He gives me eggs in the morning. He shows me how to brush the horses, how to count fence posts. He let me break a plate without yelling. A beat. He doesn't want to fix me. He just wants me there." The judge looked down, scribbled something, then paused. Looked back up. Jed tried one last jab. "She's a girl, Judge. He's a man living alone. What's he going to teach her?" Before the judge could reply, Clara said it, clear and sharp. "He teaches me I'm not a burden." Silence, the kind that leaves no room for arguments. The judge leaned forward. "You want to stay with him?" "Yes, sir." "Do you understand this isn't a game, that if I say so, it becomes real and legal and forever?" Clara nodded. "Then I have no reason to stop it." He struck the gavel once. Just once. It was enough. The sound echoed like thunder over an open plain. Jed surged to his feet. "This ain't right. You people—" Sheriff Caldwell stepped forward. Jed froze. Martha touched her husband's sleeve, but said nothing. Outside the courthouse, the wind picked up again. Clara and Elias walked side by side down the steps. She held the court papers tucked in her dress. He offered his hand to help her up onto the saddle. This time, she didn't hesitate. They rode home in silence, the kind that didn't need breaking. At the ridgeline, Clara looked back once, not at the courthouse, not at Jed, but at the world that didn't know her yet and wouldn't recognize her when it finally did. There was a stillness after the storm, not the kind you can measure by the wind or the trees, but the sort that settles into the walls of a house, into the way someone pours coffee slower, breathes steadier, speaks less because they no longer have to explain why they stayed quiet for so long. 2 days after the courthouse, Clara sat on the front porch, watching the barn roof shimmer under the late spring sun. A black cat, half wild and 3/4 mean, had made its home under the chicken coop. She named it Boots and fed it anyway. In the afternoon, Elias brought out an old wooden crate and a square of glass wrapped in cloth. He placed them on the table without a word. Clara came over curious. Inside the crate, a battered camera, the kind that required patience and sunlight and stillness. "Figured it's time we had a picture," Elias said. "Of us?" He nodded. "Of what's real now." The photo was taken by the neighbor boy from 3 miles down, Levi, who smelled of kerosene and always wore one boot taller than the other. Clara stood beside Elias, not in front or behind. He rested one hand lightly on her shoulder. She held Ruth Ann's stitched rabbit in one arm. Her other hand closed around the wooden bird Elias had carved for her a few nights back. When the picture dried, Elias framed it in cedar and set it on the shelf beside Ruth Ann's. That night, as the fire burned low, Clara asked, "Do you think she'd like me?" Elias stared at the flame a long time. Ruth Ann had a way of liking people before they believed they were worth it. So yeah, she'd have liked you just fine. Clara nodded, pulled the quilt tighter around her. In the photo, her face didn't smile, but her eyes weren't scared either. That felt like enough. The days settled into their own quiet rhythm. Mornings were for chores, mucking stalls, feeding hens, checking for broken fence boards. Clara followed close behind Elias, learning by watching. Sometimes he explained things, sometimes he didn't. She seemed to understand both kinds of teaching. Midday, she read out loud from books they borrowed from town. Her voice still stumbled over some of the bigger words, but she never gave up. In the evenings, she told stories, not made up, but memories she'd kept locked away, like how she used to dream about being invisible so no one would yell, or how she'd once hidden a biscuit in her pocket for 3 days before working up the nerve to eat it. Elias never interrupted, never told her not to say those things. He just listened. Then one morning, a letter came. stamped from the county, nothing threatening in the ink, but Clara watched Elias read it with narrowed eyes. "What is it?" she asked. He passed it to her. Legal wording, but near the end it said, "This letter serves as confirmation of permanent guardianship, signed and sealed by county judge." Clara read it twice, then a third time, finally whispered, "So, no one can take me now?" "No one," Elias said. She didn't cry. She just folded it back slow and neat and tucked it into the cedar box, where she kept things that mattered. Feathers, stones, the ribbon from Ruth Ann's dress. A week later, the photographer boy brought a second copy of their photo just because he liked the way they stood in it. Clara took it, framed it herself, and placed it beside Ruth Ann's portrait. Now there were two. She didn't say anything when she did it. Just ran her fingers along the edge of both frames and whispered, "Now we're even." The nights came gentler, the silences less sharp, but the past, like a coyote too clever to catch, never strayed too far. It waited just out of sight. Summer bled slow across the plains, leaving gold streaks in the sky and dust on every boot that crossed Coyote Ridge. The barn doors creaked louder in the heat, and Elias's breath grew heavier climbing the hayloft, though he said nothing of it. One afternoon, he brought Clara a slip of paper, not a bill or a notice, but a printed flyer from the post office in Lone Butte. It read, "Jed Crowder, deceased. Killed in barroom dispute over Dyson debts. Survived by wife, Martha Crowder, whereabouts unknown." Elias handed it over like passing a stone. Not heavy, just something better not left lying on the ground. Clara read it once, then again. Her eyes didn't widen, nor her hands shake. Instead, she asked, "Does this mean it's done?" Elias didn't lie. "No, honey, just means he can't come back. But the parts of him you carry, that'll take time." Clara nodded. That night she stood outside long after the fire had turned to coals. She didn't cry. She just stared toward the ridge where the road vanished into dusk. The next morning she woke Elias early. "I want to go to school." He looked at her over his coffee. "Ain't gonna be easy." "I know. Kids might ask about things. I'll tell 'em I live on a horse ranch and can shoot straighter than their papas." He chuckled once. That dry sort of laugh that still surprised him. The first week of school came and went like a wild horse just learning the fence lines. Clara returned each day with scuffed shoes, a torn notebook, and questions about things like fractions and rivers in the East. But by the second week, the whispers started. Some kid named Billy Traeger, whose mother still paid the Crowders for quilting, called her the girl with two names and no real blood. Clara didn't swing back. She didn't run. She waited until the teacher wasn't looking, leaned in close, and said, "My daddy plants hope. Yours just plants tobacco. Let's see which one grows taller." She got a split lip for that, but also a friend in Josie Bell who helped her up and shared her bread the next day. When Elias saw the bruise, he didn't ask for names, just wiped the blood and said, "Still worth it?" Clara nodded. Every bit. The land turned drier by September. Grass curled, wind picked up, boots tracked more dirt inside. But there was something soft, too, a peace settling like dust on shelves. One evening, Clara was stacking jars of preserves when she paused, listening. "Someone's riding," she whispered. Elias stepped onto the porch. Hoofbeats, 3 of them, coming slow. The riders came into view just as the sun tipped below the canyon. One older man with silver hair, 2 younger ones flanking him. They didn't speak, just pulled up and waited like they owned the road. Elias stepped forward, rifle across his arm. Not raised, not hidden. "Evenin'," he said. The older man nodded. "Name's Silas Wardle. I believe you have our kin?" Elias didn't flinch. "You're late. She's of Crowder blood. Martha was my cousin." "Blood's easy," Elias said. "Being a father ain't." Silas looked past him, eyes settling on the door. Clara stood there, holding the carved wooden hawk close. "She looks strong," Silas said. "She is. We'll be back with papers." "You do that," Elias replied, calm as still water, "but bring a heart with them next time." They turned without another word. After the dust settled, Clara whispered, "I ain't scared." Elias laid a hand on her shoulder. "You will be. That's all right. Just don't let it tell you where to go." That night, Elias checked the cellar door twice, loaded every shell in the house, but in the dark, he watched Clara sleep by the hearth and knew one thing for certain. Whatever storm was coming, she wasn't the girl hiding behind windows anymore. She was the one who'd stand on the porch and face it. The sun hadn't yet cleared the mesa when the letter arrived. Sheriff Caldwell brought it himself, wrapped in oilskin, face drawn tight like a fence pulled too hard on brittle wood. He didn't come inside, just handed Elias the envelope and muttered, "From New Mexico territory. No return name. Thought you ought to have it before the rest of town hears." Elias read it on the porch, boots planted firm. Clara stood beside him, barefoot in the cold morning dirt. The wooden hawk clutched like it could take flight if she needed it to. The letter was typed, formal, dry. It said Clara May had bloodkin in Santa Rosa, folks by the name of Wardell, and they were filing to reclaim her as rightful guardian under familial clause. It read like a claim to cattle. Clara didn't blink. "They want to take me?" Elias folded the letter. "They want to pretend they ever gave a damn." That afternoon, Elias built a second bolt for the cellar door, taught Clara how to pack quickly, which corner of the pasture held the shallowest crossing, which tree to ride past before turning north. "I ain't runnin'," she told him. "No, ma'am, but I might." He handed her a map drawn by hand, with circles and crosses and names she'd never heard. Clara spent that evening tracing each route with her finger. The kitchen smelled of cornbread and rifle oil. 2 days later, the riders returned. Silas Wardell came first, clean-shaven this time, dressed like a preacher but without the warmth. Behind him, the same 2 gunslicks as before, one with a fresh scar along his jaw. Elias stepped out before they could dismount. "You bring the law?" "No, sir, we brought the truth." "You mistake those often?" Silas motioned to the younger man beside him, tall, blue-eyed, with the kind of arrogance bred from never being told no. "This here's my nephew Thad. He and Martha shared a bloodline with Clara's mother." "Not her father?" "Don't matter." Elias shook his head. "It always matters." Silas dismounted, handed over a thick envelope. Inside were more papers, seals, family trees, even an old photograph of a baby Clara, no doubt, held in arms that didn't look like love. Elias didn't open the photograph. "I've raised her," he said, voice flat. "Tended to wounds y'all never knew she had." "She's kin." "No," Clara said, stepping forward. "I'm not." Silas turned, as if seeing her for the first time. "Sweetheart, don't call me that." Her voice didn't shake. "You want me now 'cause you think I belong to someone, but she pointed to Elias. "He wanted me when I didn't belong to nothing." The gunslick with the scar shifted, eyes scanning the fence line. But Thad just laughed. "She's mouthy. You really think that's good for a girl?" Elias stepped forward, slow, calm. "You ought to leave now." Silas raised a hand. "We'll be back with a judge." "Bring God." "While you're at it," Elias said, "you'll need him more than I will." The riders turned again, slower this time, not retreating, just measuring. That night, Clara curled by the fire, the letter in her lap. She hadn't cried, not once, but when Elias sat beside her, she asked, "What if they get someone to lie for them?" "They might." "What if they win?" He placed one hand over hers. "Then we run, or we fight, or both." She didn't answer right away, just stared at the flames until her voice came like gravel underfoot. I don't want to run. I want to stay. I want them to know they can't take what ain't theirs. You're not theirs, he said. You're mine, she whispered. That night, Elias pulled down an old cedar box. Inside were deeds, tax records, a wedding band too small for his hand now. He added Clara's letter of guardianship, the map she'd studied, and a note scribbled in hard, tidy handwriting. If I don't make it, this place is hers. He didn't tell her, not yet, but she knew. Somewhere deep down, Clara understood. Sometimes love means preparing for the worst. While praying, it doesn't come. The sun broke hard that morning, slicing through the cloud bank like a blade. Cold light spilled across the yard as if even the heavens were holding their breath. Sheriff Caldwell arrived before breakfast, his boots mud-wet, face unreadable. Court courier passed through town, he said to Elias. Judge signed off on their claim. They're coming. Got papers. Elias didn't flinch. So do I. You got the girl? Inside. Ain't hiding. Caldwell nodded slow. I'll be here, but you know the law's leanin' their way. She's leanin' mine. The sheriff stepped back down the porch and lit a smoke, with fingers that trembled more than they used to. Clara stood at the door, already dressed, hair brushed back with care, holding the deed and the note Elias had penned. She hadn't asked for help getting ready. I heard, she said. Elias just nodded. They'll be here soon. The Wardles rode up like they'd practiced, Silas in front, upright and polite in the way only dangerous men are. Thad beside him, grinning like he'd already won. And behind them, a third rider, a woman with pale eyes and a lined face under a tight bun. Clara guessed it was Martha. She looked more like a whisper than a threat. Caldwell stepped between both parties. You come with court documents. Silas handed him a folder. All proper, signed and sealed. She's of our blood. We have right to kin. Caldwell opened the documents, squinted, and looked to Elias. You got anything to add? Elias handed him the envelope. Inside, the guardianship affidavit, the sheriff's own report of neglect, the doctor's medical statements, and the girl's words written in pen as careful as prayer. She ain't a thing to be passed around, Elias said. She chose. That ought to count. Silas stepped forward. She's a child. She don't know what's best. She knows better than y'all, Elias said, voice iron flat. Thad dismounted, eyes on Clara. You think this old man's gonna protect you when the law don't? Clara stepped down the porch. Her boots struck wood like thunder. I don't need protectin', she said. I needed someone to see me. He did. Thad laughed, cruel and sharp. He ain't your blood. I don't care. Silas sighed. Sweetheart, you're young. You'll see one day. Blood matters. No, sir. Love matters. And y'all never gave me that. Not once. Caldwell turned to the woman. Martha Crowder. You got anything to say? The woman shifted in her saddle, but said nothing. She stared at Clara like looking in a mirror she'd boarded up years ago. Clara stared back. You let him hurt me. You helped him lie. You never said sorry. Martha blinked, then lowered her gaze. Silas stiffened. We got papers. She's coming with us. She's got a voice now, Elias said. Caldwell looked to Clara. You sure? She nodded. I'm sure. Caldwell turned to Silas. Then I can't force her. You want to appeal, take it to Fort Brooks. Thad cursed under his breath. Silas held his hand out to stop him. Not today, the old man muttered. They turned their horses, leaving dust and silence behind. Elias stood still, shoulders square. When the last rider vanished over the ridge, Clara walked up to Caldwell and handed him the court letter. Burn it. He took it and nodded. You'll make one hell of a storm when you grow up, girl. She smiled faintly. Already have. That night the house was quieter than usual. No threat lingering, no boots crunching outside. Just wind, and the creak of wood settling, and the sound of peace that hadn't visited in some time. By the fire, Elias sat polishing a horseshoe. Clara curled beside him, the wooden hawk in her lap. "Are they gone for good?" she asked. "No one's ever gone for good," he said, "but sometimes they stop trying." She nodded. "Good." They sat that way for a long while. Finally, Elias said, "You did right." Clara looked up. "I did what you would." He smiled, slow and full of weight. "I reckon that's the same thing now." Elias started coughing in February. It was a quiet thing at first, a sharp sound in the cold mornings, a rasp by the fire at night. Clara noticed before he did. She brought more water to the bedside, swapped coffee for warm cider, but he never asked for help, and she never forced it. By March, the cough had deepened. He still rose at dawn, still fed the hens, still fixed the fences when snow thawed and ground gave way, but his steps grew slower, his frame lighter. Clara began chopping the wood without being told. One night, as wind scratched the windows and the fire cracked low, Elias sat down at the table and unfolded a small cloth bundle. Inside, the deed to the land, Ruth Ann's wedding ring, and a sealed envelope with Clara's name in hard ink. She looked at it, then at him. "You planning to go somewhere?" He smiled, tired but true. "No, sweetheart, just making sure the house don't fall if I do." Clara blinked. "I don't want anything from you. Just you." "You already got me," he said, voice rougher than usual. "You had me since the night you cracked that glass and didn't cry." She looked away, down at the hawk figurine on the table, its wings smooth from months of being held. "I ain't ready." "No one ever is," he said. "But the world don't wait on ready. It just comes." That spring, when the wildflowers came early, Elias took her on a ride up Cinder Ridge. Just the two of them, saddle blankets packed with biscuits and apples, the rifle strapped across his back, though he didn't lift it once. They reached the overlook near sundown, the same bluff where Ruth Ann had once stood, years before Clara ever drew breath. Elias dismounted slow, every motion deliberate. He sat on a stone bench he'd built long ago. Clara didn't speak, just stood beside him, arms crossed tight against the wind. He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small silver locket. Inside was a faded picture of Ruth Ann holding a baby boy, and beside it, space now filled with a drawing Clara had made once. A simple house, a girl by the door, a horse behind the fence. "You gave this to me," he said. "I didn't mean for you to keep it." "I did anyway." They sat in the hush, watching the shadows stretch across the valley. Elias cleared his throat. "There's a letter in the desk. Not the one with the deed. This one's for you, only you." She nodded. "I wrote it after that trial. Figured there'd come a time I couldn't say what needed saying, so I wrote it instead." "Don't talk like that," she whispered. He didn't answer, just looked out over the land, the dusk, the promise of tomorrow he knew he might not see. Back at the house, Clara made stew. She set his place like always, but his spoon went untouched. The next morning, Elias didn't come down. Clara climbed the stairs slow, hands cold. She found him lying still, one hand beneath his cheek, the other over the wooden hawk on his chest. The window beside his bed was cracked open. Wind carried the smell of pine and distant rain. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She sat beside him, folded his hands proper, and whispered, "Thank you." Sheriff Caldwell helped bury him. The whole town came, even ones who'd never spoken to Elias before. They brought biscuits, jam, and quiet stories. Clara didn't speak much. She stood by the grave in her blue dress and Ruth Ann's old shawl, and never left his side until the last shovel of earth was packed. Back home she opened the letter. It was short. You were never a burden. You were always a gift. You saved what was left of me, and now it's yours. The land, the house, the sky overhead. Make something good. Make something kind. I love you, Clara. I always did. She read it once, then again, then pressed it to her chest and went out to feed the hens. By the barn door she nailed a sign Elias had carved but never hung. C. McGraw, horse training and feed. She stood a while, watching the name catch sunlight. It didn't feel like the end. It felt like roots settling deeper. 3 years passed in a breath. Spring came early again to Coyote Ridge. The cottonwoods bloomed in pale yellow, and the hills beyond Dust Hollow rolled like waves under the wind. The fence posts out at the far end of the pasture leaned a little more now, but Clara never let one rot through. She knew the land, the air, the feel of the soil under her boots. She was 12, almost as tall as Ruth Ann had been, lean as a deer, with hands calloused like Elias's, and eyes too old for her age. Folks in town still called her that girl out at the McGraw place, but their tone had changed. There was no pity in it now, just respect, and maybe a little awe. She ran the stable herself, trained ponies for children, draft horses for the freight line, and once, even a sheriff's mule that no man dared saddle. She fixed tack, loaded feed, wrote invoices in sharp, looping letters, but every night she still lit the fireplace the way Elias taught her. Pine first, then kindling, then oak. One evening just after sunset, as clouds boiled low and orange on the horizon, she heard hoofbeats. 2 figures approached on a single tired horse, brother and sister, no older than 6 or 7, clothes torn, faces smudged with travel. The boy had freckles and carried a bag that dragged behind him. The girl clutched a stuffed dog missing one eye. They stopped at the gate and looked in like they weren't sure they belonged. Clara stepped out from the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "You 2 lost?" The boy shook his head. "We're looking for a man named McGraw." She smiled soft. "Ain't no man named McGraw here no more." The girl tightened her grip on the stuffed animal. "But," Clara added, "there's a place here if you need rest." They said nothing, just looked to one another. "Come on," Clara said. "I got stew on, plenty for 3. They tied the horse at the post, and Clara watched as they approached like feral deer testing still water. Inside, the house glowed warm. She handed them each a bowl, thick with carrots and rabbit, and poured fresh milk from the cellar jar. The girl looked at the picture on the mantel, Elias beside Clara, both of them squinting against sunlight, a hawk carved from pine between them. The boy asked, "That your pa?" "He was," Clara said. "Still is, I think." They ate quiet for a time. Then after dishes were done and the wind shifted cold again, Clara brought out an extra quilt and spread it on the floor near the hearth. "You can sleep here tonight safe. Warm." The girl finally spoke. "What's this place called?" Clara paused. She looked around, at the wooden beams Elias had smoothed with his hands, at the scuffed floor where Ruth Ann once stood, at the porch Elias built with sweat and nails when his sons were small. Then she answered, "Home." That night she sat by the fire long after the children had curled under the blanket. She carved a new hawk with her pocket knife, smaller this time, but just as sharp in the wings. Outside, the wind blew steady from the north. She stepped onto the porch and looked up. The stars were thick, but one burned brighter than the rest, right above the ridgeline where Cinder Ridge kissed the sky. Elias had told her once that Ruth Ann watched from that spot. Now she figured he did too. She whispered, "We're all right," and left the door open, just a crack,